Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Banking Matters. I'm your host, Linsey Hughley, and if you've been a regular listener of the podcast, you know the first Monday of the month, we like to keep our conversations internal. And this month, I am so excited to announce that we have a new co-host joining me on the podcast. It's one of our virtual compliance officers, Laura Benson. Hi. So Laura's been with us since March, and we're really looking forward to having you on the podcast and seeing your input and your perspective. So why don't you tell our listeners a little about your experience and about yourself?
Yeah. I live in Bozeman, Montana, and I've been in banking for about 13 years and specifically in compliance for about 8. I actually started out way back in the day as a loan assistant, and that's how I got started in banking. I was living in North Dakota at the time, and I just saw this little ad for a loan assistant. I was like, oh, I could work in a bank. That sounds fun. And so I went in there, and they were like, well, we'd really like someone with banking experience. And I was like, well, I don't have that, but how do I get it unless you hire me? And so I basically convinced them to just give me a chance, and the rest is history, really. So that was a good learning experience. From there, I moved back to Montana. I got another job for a little tiny, $60 billion bank here in town. And that's kind of where I kind of expanded in my banking knowledge. As anybody who works in a small community bank, they wear many hats, and that's really where you just get thrown into the fire and you learn all aspects of banking. So I did a lot of credit analyst work and then credit admin, and that's kind of where compliance just chose me. And so from there, I kind of learned to love it, honestly. And then from there, I worked as a compliance officer for a bigger bank for about 7 years before I came here.
Yeah, it really is funny how pretty much everybody that I've talked to that is in compliance, it's never something that they've set out to really do. You just kind of fall into it. But the people that stay in it, you really do have to love it because it is its own special beast. For sure.
Yeah, I don't know that anybody says, when I grow up, I want to be a compliance officer.
Now, I do think that there have been maybe a few of our guests. I do remember one that she was like, I wanted to be in banking, but her whole family had come from it. And I was like, that's about the only time that you do wake up and say, I want to be a compliance officer.
Definitely.
And so we are both working from home. And Laura, I know you've got 2 kids. How has working during the summer and school being out, how's that been going?
I'm almost scared to go into my kitchen for lunch because it's like, what is it going to look like? They're like little kitchen gremlins, and they just kind of climb shelves and they just eat whatever they can find because they learn to adjust. And summertime's hard because they're just home more often and they get bored, and they have to learn that just because you're home doesn't mean that you can play with them and they can go to the park and do all these things. So they've learned the boundaries, which is good. So they're eating breakfast and watching TV right now. So
yes. And I will say I've got 3 boys at home with me too. But this is my second summer now having them at home. And it does, like you said, it takes time for them to realize just because mom's home doesn't mean she's fully available. We're not going to the pool every day, all of that stuff. So it's definitely fun. And I will say, and my banks that I work with know, sometimes my kids, they make a little cameo coming up in the back. But again, we don't get the opportunity to be in the banks. And so sometimes I feel like that just helps make us more part of each bank's family and part of their organization.
Yeah, that's so true. Mine are kind of little still too. And there's been times where all afternoon, they're just playing cards at my feet under my desk, and they're just so quiet. I've had phone calls with banks for half an hour, and you would never know they were there. So good job, kiddos.
Yes. They do need some recognition too, because I know it's hard. And so let's see, you've said you've been in compliance for about 8 years. What area do you think has really kind of stuck out to you that you've been super passionate about? Because I feel like you always, every compliance officer has their favorite regulation, their favorite area. But what specifically do you feel like you are passionate about?
Oh, easily HMDA. I know it sounds weird. It's usually the one that everybody hates, but I don't know. I love it. I think it's because it was like my first compliance experience. Like when I was back in my first job as a loan assistant, it was like they needed someone to double check HMDA data. And I was like, I could do that. And my weird self found it fun. And I remember thinking at the time that I was like, man, this is a lot of information that we collect about people. Like, this feels like it should be none of our business. And that was just my little baby, like, banking brain at the time. And then as I came, into learning over the years that, the importance of that data and what it can really tell and how it does protect our consumers, that, it is important. And so I kind of use that none of your business to train in HMDA sometimes. So I call it HMDA, none your business, question mark. And then I don't know. It's kind of silly, but it's stuck with me for a long time. I do geek out with HMDA data. So
Yes. So my favorite part about what we get to do is helping train. And you referenced training people with HMDA, but honestly, it's taking that regulation, that area that you were passionate about, and now because you have such, honestly, big feelings for the regulation, it's so much easier to take it and teach somebody and try to get them to understand the importance and give them a reason to care about it. Because again, you can see the end date. You can see what's happening with that data and how beneficial it can be.
Yeah, and I'm a why person. So if I understand why I have to do something, it makes sense to me. But I'm just like, at first, like I said, when I didn't understand it, I was like, this is ridiculous. Why are we doing all of this? This seems insane, but I'm always like the why. And so, yeah, just like you said, if you understand why you're doing something, people learn to appreciate it and they understand that what they're doing serves a purpose.
Yes, for sure. My very first job in banking, my title was reconciliation clerk, and I was basically just taking data from different departments and putting it into reports and creating spreadsheets to give to the board for upper management to report to them. I was 18 years old. I had no idea what I was looking at. And I don't think I fully understood the depth of the information I was looking at until I got to my second bank, which was after college. And I was like, oh, they trusted me, this little college kid, to accurately do all of that. But yes, and I do feel like, just like you said, when you first get into banking, it's such a process because there are so many things that we are regulated by, all the different rules and areas of that. And when you have someone that's new, some banks, especially smaller community banks, it's hard for them to have the time to really full focus, give you all those examples for every aspect that you're going to be touching. And so honestly, sometimes it just takes time and experience.
Oh, yeah. And it really does help to see where that information goes. Cause it's like you were saying that once you saw the back end of it, you're like, oh. And it just reminded me of a conference that I went to recently. It was a BSA conference and it was through State Bankers Association, and they brought in FBI agents from the FBI. And it was really cool because they just said, hey, like, how you have to file all those CTRs and SARs. Well, this is what they do with it. And these are all the bad guys that we catch. And like, so then I'm like, ooh, I'm like a crime stopper too, So it's really cool to see how they access that information to catch the money launderers and the terrorists and all.
And as a lot of people know, BSA, it just gets my gears going. It is one of my favorite regulations to deal with, and really one of the main regulations. That's the one that I could sit and my goal is always to make every single person that I have to help with that understand, okay, because with that regulation in my head, there's always a reason and a logic behind why we are having to make these decisions, gather this information, send these reports. Because it was several years ago, there was a bank that I was with and we were watching some stuff and we were involved with what we suspected to be wire fraud. Well, 7 months down the road, there was this huge drug bust and everything. And we knew, because we knew the house that it was at, it was this specific thing that we had been reporting on, that we had been notating. And so our gut instinct had been correct on that. And so honestly, it is such a rush to be able to see that and witness it. And now not every SAR is going to turn into that, but usually with your gut instinct, if you think that something's wrong, especially or suspicious in regards to BSA, usually you are correct. And so, but yes, BSA is my passion. But on top of that, my favorite part, especially about the role that we're in now, number one, we get to work with several different banks. We are so intertwined with their day-to-day and their employees. But I love taking specific instances or regulations or areas of the bank that we know that we need help with, and creating and giving and participating in those trainings. And honestly, the most rewarding thing is when you get done with the training that you've gone through and you've tailored specifically to this bank and their policies and procedures, and then they have questions that really are critical thinking and flush out any nuances that they may have had from their experience of working in that institution. And then I've had one where the entire group, we had one question, we answered it, and they all went, oh, like everything just clicked. But just knowing that we are such a team that we can work together and I can play a role in helping them understand, especially like you said, the why of why they are having to document and CID and OFAC check all of these people, or all the extra steps that it feels like you have to take. Because again, like you said, when you're new in banking, everything just feels, it just feels, oh, why are we doing that? Maybe we're asking too much and it's an invasion of privacy. But again, once you get some time and maybe even move to a different department, being able to see all that different stuff and how it works and intertwines, it makes such a huge difference. And honestly, I feel like it's easier as in a compliance role to ask more of your employees when you have that rapport and when they already understand, oh, well, I know if she's asking me this, there has to be a logical reason, instead of, oh, it's just extra work.
Yeah, I know. Like we get a bad reputation, but we really just put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And it's like we see what's going on from all these different departments and all these things, but it all connects together. And that's maybe why I like compliance. I think it's fun in the sense that I like a good challenge, and I like to see where things are going and how they all intertwine and connect. So I totally get what you're saying.
Yes. And another thing that's honestly really great about compliance is the regulatory landscape is never going to remain the same. And so you still have to maintain some adaptability and flexibility in regards to your knowledge of current regulations and current rules, but then also like bringing in, once things start changing, you've got to be able to communicate that to your employees, your coworkers, your banks, all of that too.
Oh, yeah. Yep, and it's fun too, like getting to work with all these different banks because you kind of see trends happening at the same time too. Like you'll see all of a sudden it's like, oh, why am I seeing all of these like flood things all of a sudden at all my banks? And then it just kind of like comes in waves, but it seems to be a similar area with all of them at the same time, which is very interesting.
Yes,
I don't
I
know if you've
agree.
ever had that happen, but I'm just like, wow, it's like everybody's on the same page, but they're all in different states.
Yes, it is wild. And so I mean, honestly, from our perspective, I feel like, and I know from a BSA standpoint, I had several banks having the same type of, their customers were involved in the exact same type of scams, the exact same outcomes. And I mean, granted, they were already in the thick of it and everything, but from a reporting standpoint, a recovery standpoint, I was able to say, at least you're not alone. I know this is a widespread thing, and I know that doesn't really make it better. But again, that just goes to show, because I know sometimes when banks are involved, especially in like larger scams, they feel like that maybe, and there could be some procedural deficits that are happening. But when you're seeing it across states at different banks, different cores, different demographics,
Hmm.
that's not procedural faults. That is the scammers doing
Hmm.
and excelling at their job, as much as we don't
Yes.
like to see it.
Yeah, especially the ones that hit the teller lines because that's such an area of high turnover. And so you're always training tellers and having them, know what to look for. And sometimes, like, I don't know if you see this a whole lot, but sometimes with like wire fraud, it's like, well, how am I supposed to say no to this transaction? It's their money. They can send it wherever they want. And I'm like, okay, this is a good training opportunity. You can always say no to a transaction. And if we suspect that something is suspicious or it doesn't seem right, we want to protect our customer, and they might not see it that way at first, but they will ultimately see the end game and that you are there for them to protect them. But those tellers, man, because they get hit with all the frontline stuff, they're trying to work quickly. They're trying to, they could have a line out the door and they're just trying to work fast. I mean, I feel for them. Like, it is such a thankless job. It really is.
Yes, and I remember in college they had me which they did not often remove the beloved drive-through teller, but when she did go on vacation, they stuck the college kid back there. And I'm talking, these people were like, "Where's she at? Where's she at? Where's she at?" They were almost offended that someone new was serving them. And so the relationships that our tellers do build with their customers that are regular, it makes such a big difference. And you are right, it is a thankless job, and that's another reason why, like, just from my perspective, I love being able to empower our tellers to know that these are what you can and can't do, but I still want you to build those relationships with your customers, because then when you do have to say, "Oh, we can't send this wire for you," it may make it a little bit easier, and you'll be able to explain to them why you're doing it, because we want to serve our customers, and tellers, they're going to get the good, bad, and the ugly from all of our customers.
Oh, yeah. That's a great point. Yep. They would be much more willing to listen when you've had those relationships for sure. So,
Yes. Yes. So I will say we'll just wrap it up with kind of an overview of what podcasts we do have coming up. For the rest of July, in the next few weeks, we're going to have Christopher Lebedo and Pat Huttenbach as guests on the podcast. Chris shares his experience working in banks of all sizes, the challenges community banks face, and how to overcome those challenges. And Pat is going to dig into all things UCC and then the litigations around it, which I'm excited to for that to come out and to listen to, because I know UCC is a constant question, at least with my banks, and it's state specific and it's so cumbersome. And I'm sure you've dealt with the same type of situations.
yeah. And they all handle it differently,
Yeah.
because it is so state specific. So that one keeps me on my toes.
Yes, for sure. I'm always double checking to make sure that I am reading it right, that we've got the right information. That is this area related to state law? I don't know. We're going to have to find out. We got to ask our attorneys. So, yeah, I'm excited to hear both of those. It'll be great. And also, I do want to say, all of you out there listening, we are always looking for new guests to have on the podcast. And if you are interested in being a guest, please shoot us an email at info@compliancealliance.com. And one of the hosts will reach out to you to line something up so that we can get an interview going and have you on the podcast, because we are always looking for new guests. So we'll wrap it up for the day. And Laura, we are so excited to have you on the podcast, and we look forward to your episodes coming up. And for the rest of our listeners, that's Banking Matters.